Tēnā koutou. Tuatahi aki ka mihi au ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohe. Ngā e tua huriri tēnā koutou. Ka mihi hoki au ki ngā tohu o te rohe nei. Ki era atu o ngā matawaka, ngā uri o ngā hau I whā e hui hui mai nei I tēnei pō. He mihi aroha tēnei ki a koutou. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you everyone for being here this evening. I'm Emma Johnson, the Comms and Marketing Lead excuse me, at Te Pūtahi, and I also help curate Christchurch Conversations. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you all here for tonight's He Whakawhiti Kōrero Christchurch Conversation, Ōtautahi in 2050. First up, we'd like to thank and acknowledge the organisations that support these events. A big thank you to the Christchurch City Council, which funds the series through the Sustainability Fund. Tonight, we explore what day-to-day life in our city might be like in 2050 and how we best get ready for this as individuals, whānau, communities and a city. Although climate change is a global process, Ōtautahi will experience its impacts and risks and hazards specific to the context of our city. So, what might this look like? What does this mean for the built environment, for insurance? How about personal and ecological well-being? And perhaps most importantly, what decisions, actions and planning do we need to put in place today to be ready? Our invited speakers, whom I will introduce shortly, come from a range of backgrounds and offer us their perspectives on what deserves attention so that we can collectively work towards a livable city in 2050. So to briefly outline the rest of the evening, next up we have 4 quickfire presentations, which will be followed by a panel discussion of around 45 minutes. We'll then round out the evening with a poetry reading from Erik Kennedy. Now, whether you're attending this event online or you're in the room, you can ask the panel's questions by texting it to 022 565 8693. Now, you can record the number now, or it will also be on screen during the Q&A. And our online audience also has the options to ask questions via the chat in the YouTube channel. Questions from both sources will be conveyed to the panel by the Te Pūtahi team. Apologies in advance, there's every chance we won't be able to put all your questions to the panel, but we will do our best. It's my pleasure to briefly introduce our speakers for this evening. So opening tonight's presentations is Tom Parsons, a chartered professional engineer with over 20 years experience in water resources engineering. He works at Council on the planning and delivery of flood management and stormwater quality infrastructure, and supports the Coastal Hazards Adaptation team. We then have James, and I actually didn't check how to say your last name, Baigent, resilience leader at the Insurance Council of New Zealand. His work focuses on how the insurance sector can support natural hazard risk reduction and resilience to maintain the availability of insurance. Then we follow that with Sarah Macfarlane, who is a health promoter for climate change and wellbeing at National Public Health Waitaha, where she works to create supportive environments for community wellbeing through participation in action. And finally, our last speaker is Rod Carr, former chair of the Climate Change Commission. And over the last 22 years, he has spent 10 years as a director of Littleton Port Company, 10 years as a director of Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce and Business Canterbury, 10 years as Vice Chancellor at the University of Canterbury, and 5 years on the board of Ōtautahi Limited. But first, please welcome Tom Parsons to the stage.
Kia ora koutou, thanks for the introduction. With a quick fire presentation, I've got to get in really quickly, so I'll jump right in. During this presentation, I'm going to provide some context on the long-term view for the district and provide some reference material for those of you who want to find out more. I'm going to take a bit of a focus on natural hazards, just to give us a bit of an indication on what the future might look like. So what can we see from where we stand today? One look forward is Council's climate change risk screening that looked out to around 2100. This report was completed in 2022 and highlighted the potential for changes to vary across the district by proximity to the coast and also topography. Broadly, the hazards increased by climate change include drought, heat and wildfire, intense rainfall, flooding from the sea and waterways, and rising groundwater. More recently, though, the MFE has published some data based upon refinement of broad-scale climate models. This work was summarised for the district as shown on the charts here. And I realise these figures are a bit small, so I've summarised on the left there some of the key outcomes. We might expect in the period around 2050, say reported by the MFE being 2041 through to 2060, to see an average increase in temperature by 0.8 to 1.4 degrees. So we might expect more hot days, some changes in both annual and seasonal rainfall, but also some increases in extreme rainfall event. So what does this mean for hazards? On that top left there, we've got a chart of potential sea level rise scenarios based upon similar data to what the MFE I presented before. It shows by 2050 we might expect around 0.2 metres of sea level rise. But it's important to recognise that there's uncertainties with these scenarios and that there are in fact more extreme scenarios than I've presented on this plot. The information shouldn't be thought of as a prediction or a forecast. It should be thought of as a range of potential futures. And whilst the science is improving with time, I believe that there are going to be significant uncertainties still moving forward that we are all going to have to learn to deal with. But what does a 0.2 metre sea level rise mean for us? Well, in terms of frequency of coastal flooding, there is about a 0.2 metre difference in the water level statistics at Bridge Street at the mouth of the Avon River, Ōtautahi Avon River. And a 10-year event on average at that location is only 0.2 metres above an event that occurs every year. So with something we might see once every 10 years, with 2.2 metres of sea level rise, might occur every year. And the same picture sort of is set there for extreme events. So a 100-year event that we might expect today, by 2050 we might expect once every 15 years. The centre image shows the potential coastal inundation in that rare 100-year event with 0.2 metres of sea level rise. And this can be found on Council's Coastal Hazards Viewer. I realise the pictures here is a bit small. On that viewer, there are a broad range of different present day and future scenarios that you can look up in detail. And I recommend that you take the chance to look at that website because you can look up your own property and find out more detail. Coastal erosion data is also presented on that viewer. And that gives us a sense of how the coastline might change in position with time. Tsunami risks are also set to increase with rising sea levels. And there are also potential for long-term chronic stresses, not just shocks. Post-earthquake, the land has continued to move. Vertical land movement is occurring at rates much greater than long-term averages. Subsidence has been measured by detailed local surveying and satellite data. The impacts of vertical land movement are still being explored and understood, but these impacts could be significant in some parts of the city. The combined effects of seas rising and land dropping will reduce the depth to shallow groundwater. Rising groundwater is likely to be a leading hazard, with issues arising before we might expect to find surface water flooding issues intolerable. The impacts of rising groundwater include increasing risks of rising damp in dwellings, difficulty in maintaining utility infrastructure such as wastewater pipes and roading. Changes might also be expected to drainage patterns and vegetation cover. So how might all this combine by 2050? Well, for starters, it's not going to look like this picture. Well, but things we might thought of as a once-in-a-lifetime event might occur much more regularly. But I'm still not suggesting that's going to be daily life. We will all have to learn with some uncertainty and with change. There is potential for need for significant investments in management of hazards. Costs for providing services will likely increase. We might need to invest in many issues at once, trying to tackle more heat and more flooding as well as higher groundwater and so on. There will also be ecological system stresses, such as heat and pest species arriving. But what can we do about it? I don't want to be all doom and gloom. Well, the city has started working on it. The diagram on the left is taken from the Council's climate resilience strategy. It highlights key actions for supporting climate resilience. Council is taking a leadership role in mitigation and adaptation, and I understand the next talk in this speaker series is going to be focused on adaptation in particular. Council has also established a climate resilience fund to help pay for future work to minimise the impacts of climate change. Council also takes a proactive risk management approach through the district plan, looking at future development. We also do a lot of greening infrastructure, building things like new wetlands and facilities for treating stormwater. But we can also do stuff as individuals, right? Mitigation is possible at the household scale, although somewhat challenging. Electrification and other measures can be undertaken by us all. There are adaptations we can take also on a property level. Things like installing rain tanks, being careful with what cladding we put on the outsides of our houses, making sure any earthwork that we do doesn't interrupt overland flow paths or cause flooding on our neighbours. Limiting the amount of imperviousness we have on our own site could make a significant difference. That's things like driveways and patios. Trying to keep that to a minimum allows water to soak to ground and causes less problem for your neighbours. Other things you can do is to look to understand what's coming. I suspect I'm preaching to the converted here if you're in this room. Engaging with the processes Council has planned on coastal hazards adaptation are very important. I also think that we need to do our best to protect our environment, because a healthy environment is likely to be more resilient moving forward with time. And there's always a nod to emergency preparedness. It's not all bad news. As individuals and also as a community, I'm sure we'll be able to adapt to the changes coming. Thank you very much.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko James Aho. I'm the resilience leader at Te Kahui o Inihua, the Insurance Council of New Zealand. Thank you for the invitation to join this panel and to share some insurance sector perspectives on the evening's topic, Ōtautahi in 2050. I get quite excited about insurance, which isn't the experience everybody has. It can lead me into some difficult moments at parties. For example, I spoke passionately to a gentleman about stop banks, and his reaction was quite simply, However, I genuinely enjoyed reading the Ōtautahi Christchurch Climate Resilience Strategy and the Climate Risk Screen, which the previous speaker has just taken you through quite eloquently, so I'm not going to retread that excellent work. However, the point I would make is the priorities and programs contained within those documents are very closely aligned to what insurers are advocating. The core points you'll hear from me are: insurance gives people confidence to invest in their community. It underpins financial stability. For insurance to remain accessible and available everywhere, including in Ōtautahi in 2050, we must reduce natural hazard risk and improve resilience to natural hazards. And again, the previous speaker, with his local intelligence and local insight, took you through some really credible options for doing that. Climate change is increasing these hazards, which requires bold action. We think this is best done in a place-based way, with direction from communities about how they want to make sure that natural hazard events remain sudden and unforeseen. Insurance gets more difficult when damage from natural hazards stops being sudden and unforeseen. When natural hazard risk is reduced and levels of resilience are increased, insurers are more confident about writing competitive policies for the people in those areas. I've got some information that I'm going to share, but this is a quickfire presentation, so you might just have to take this as read. This is who we are as the Insurance Council of New Zealand. We are the industry representative body for general insurers, so I know the simple way for me to process that in my tiny brain is we're not life insurers or health insurers, and we protect over $2 million of New Zealand's assets. As aforesaid, we promote the availability and accessibility of insurance. We enhance the safety and protection of all New Zealanders by strengthening resilience and reducing the risk of natural hazards. Now, moving on to my next slide, which is an important one. Oh, no, we'll skip that one. Quick fire. This donut illustrates that your insurance premium does some heavy lifting before it even gets to the insurance part. As you can see, your insurance premium funds about 90% of the professional fire service. It funds the Natural Hazards Commission, formerly EQC, and I've not come prepared to talk about that in Ōtautahi. There's a GST component, like there is with everything. And to keep this mix accessible to people, we've got to overcome some key challenges. We have to reduce the protection gap by avoiding building in dumb places. Previous speaker also addressed that's a local priority and is being executed. We work with regulators to improve our response to natural hazards, and we want to ensure regulation is cost effective and coordinated. This is another chart to illustrate what we're dealing with. This is the cost of severe weather going back to Cyclone Giselle in 1968. As you can see quite clearly, the cost of severe weather is rising and has risen consistently over the time. This next chart, because this data goes right up to 2022, remember, this next chart shows all of that data with 2023 included. Further to this, recent climate change scenario analysis is suggesting average annual losses from weather-related events, that's floods, storms, and coastal inundation, could increase by a further 19 to 26% by 2050. This is predominantly driven by sea level rise, as well as more frequent and intense surface water flooding. So, what are we doing about it? ICNZ sees natural hazard resilience as core infrastructure. I'm going to go through some examples. They are from the North Island, but I'll happily swap them for some Super Rugby titles. The Taradale Stop Bank in the Hawke's Bay, which cost approximately $4 million to complete, saved close to 10,000 people's properties from flooding during Cyclone Gabrielle. The savings in lives and livelihoods from that investment has been quantified in the billions. Also during Cyclone Gabrielle, a recently completed section of the $14 million Waipoua flood resilience project in Gisborne protected an estimated 7,000 hectares of land, of residential and horticultural land. Ministers were also briefed that it protected a reported 10,000 people and $7 billion of assets, including major transport links. And a further, much lower key example, the Porirua City Council, just north of Wellington, made a $17.5 million investment in a park pump station. It was designed to reduce flood risk. This forward-looking initiative, they engaged with insurers on it, and it prompted constructive engagement, and insurers confirmed that this mitigation was positively influencing risk appetite. When these kinds of infrastructure are completed, insurers are encouraging local authorities to write to them and tell them, detail the completed project, the hazard that's been mitigated, and the properties that are protected and to what standard or what level. Insurers view these projects positively and will consider the reduced risk in their pricing models going forward. These projects also give insurers valuable evidence for how New Zealand is proactively responding to natural hazard risk. That supports their conversations with their global reinsurers, which ultimately affects premiums as well. I'm just going to thank you very much for jumping straight to that. This graph locates New Zealand at the highest end of expected losses among OECD countries. This is why we have the priorities that we have. I've stepped through them already, but among them that I just want to really emphasise is government leadership on an adaptation framework. I know that's the next topic. Insurers are strongly supportive of the government's work alongside banks, alongside local government, alongside central government to develop an enduring multi-party adaptation framework which can guide local efforts to adapt. And I'm not going to steal any more thunder from the next session and the conference that's happening in Christchurch, Ōtautahi, in a few weeks. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion and getting into any further key topics that you have about insurance. Thank you so much.
Right. Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Macfarlane toku ingoa. No piratana nui oku tupuna ke te noho o ke Ōtautahi. My ancestors are from Great Britain and I'm from here in Christchurch. When I tell people my job, I often hear, what does health have to do with climate change? People asking are usually thinking about damaged ecosystems or infrastructure like flooded roads. That's the issue right there. We've disconnected our wellbeing from the world around us. When I scoped my role to get to the root causes of climate change and how to respond, sorry, just realising I need to flick that. How to respond meaningfully, what I found is that most of our emissions and other environmentally destructive activities come from how we create our economy. And our economy stems from global economic agreements and the perpetuation of colonial ideologies based on extraction and exploitation that prioritises profits over people and a healthy environment. We're encouraged to compete and overconsume. As if climate change didn't feel too big already, these insights were overwhelming. I did not feel good, and everything got harder. So how did I, and how can you, keep moving forward? How do we hope to create a 2050 worth living in? That's part of the answer, hope. Hope is the aspiration and vision for the world we do want. Having hope can sustain us to make meaningful responses. Tonight I want to share 4 hope-enhancing pathways to 2050. I call them the 4 Cs. The first C, connection. Connect. Connection is at the heart of climate action. Author and environmentalist Bill McKibben said, the most important thing an individual can do is to be a little less of an individual. That means taking action together to amplify our impact, collaborating instead of competing, building community and reconnecting with your environment. Indigenous peoples have been demonstrating what this looks like for centuries. We can learn from and support their knowledge and practices that address the connected issues of climate change, land degradation and biodiversity loss, whilst strengthening community wellbeing. Connection is good for mental health. Connecting with others sustains our actions, and connected communities literally have higher survival rates in emergencies. Big polluters tell us climate change is an individual responsibility. Recycle better, drive less, and so on. Yes, start with yourself, but change comes when we act as a community, regenerating green spaces, caring for waterways, supporting local businesses, and raising our voices together. Realising that the knowledge on how to meaningfully address climate change exists, and then discovering so many groups that are already taking action, these connections helped restore my hope. Second C, care. Take action to care for the planet, yourself, and for others. Care about what is happening in the world around us, but with a self-care caveat. Constant negative climate stories can burn us out. Fear may push us into action for a moment, but it can also paralyse. We need hopeful stories and reminders of progress to sustain us. Taking climate action that involves connecting to nature benefits our health threefold. Spending time in nature is essential for mental health. Taking climate action in the short term alleviates climate anxiety, and in the long term can prevent the worst climate change related health impacts from developing. This is the holistic lens. Caring for people as we care for the planet sustains us. No one person can solve climate change, but each of us can contribute. We can bring our strengths and values to the table. For me, contributing looks like bringing health promotion skills, relationship building, project planning, enabling inclusive community action. I can bring my values like integrity and even humour, because joy is part of the future worth striving for. Your contribution may look different. Maybe it's technical expertise, creativity, teaching, or simply showing up. Every action matters, and together they multiply. Contribution is strengths-based. It focuses on what we can do. The last C, communicate. We need to communicate to each other and to decision makers. This could look like taking part in peaceful protests. It definitely includes voting in elections, and it's as simple as starting conversations at work, with your school, your sports club, or your church. You could go further by engaging with your community board, councillor, or local member of parliament. It could also mean providing a platform for those most impacted by climate change to be heard. We can role model. How we act is often more inspiring than what we say. Normalise positive climate actions by showing what you are doing for the environment and sharing climate good news stories. People are attracted to joyful stories. Contribute is hope. Communicating what you do helps others to take action and feel less alone. So what does health have to do with climate change? Everything. Our health depends on the health of our planet, and climate action is action for well-being. We have the tools, the 4 Cs: care, connect, contribute, and communicate. My call to you is this: live the future you want right now. Care for yourself, your community, and your planet. Connect with others, contribute your strengths, communicate your vision. Toi tu te marae a tānei, toi tu te marae a Tangaroa, toi tu te iwi. If the land is well and the sea is well, the people will thrive. Thank you.
Ina mana, ina iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Rod Carr aho. I want you to imagine it's 2050. Now, for some of us, I'll be 92. I'm going to celebrate my stepfather's 98th birthday next month, so I have every intention of being around, and most of you should plan to be too. So it's 2050. Our city is an extraordinary success story. We have managed to create an environment in which it is not only easy to get around in, to walk, to bike, to share transport. It's not just easy, it's a positive experience that we figured out how to move people and stuff around conveniently, quickly, with no emissions. We're a thriving economy with high-value jobs because we've managed to embrace the lightweight economy, keeping humans in the loop as digitization and AI have expanded to create prosperous jobs for talented people. We're a city that has eliminated the combustion of fossil fuels in the open air, as a consequence improving the air quality for everybody, everywhere, all the time. Christchurch of 2050 is an inclusive community in which we accept responsibility for the most vulnerable. We see everybody as part of our success. As a collective, Christchurch City has become so attractive that in 2040 we introduced permits for non-residents to move here. We got to choose who comes. And it wasn't just all the brightest, smartest, richest people. It was to connect a cross-section of society that would enrich the lives of everybody living in our city. We also discovered sometime after 2030 that the source of our choices was ours to control. There was no point in waiting for Wellington or blaming Beijing. That our city and region had choices many others didn't have. And we made those choices in the early 2030s when we understood that creating abundant, affordable, sustainable energy would underpin affordable living costs and business opportunities for everyone. We decided it wasn't just about the cheapest energy for today, it was about the most reliable, abundant, sustainable energy of the future. We were prepared to harness solar and wind and carefully manage hydro. We even figured out how to use short carbon cycle biomass to create energy storage locally. We kicked the habit of spending $400 million a year buying imported diesel and petrol and kept that purchasing power local. We figured out that our hinterland could yield crops not only for food to sustain us and to earn a living, but also crops to contribute to energy production. We figured out in the early 2030s that the choices we had were defined by the environment that we needed to protect, not exploit. That we would attract talented people if they could breathe the air, drink the water, and walk in the forests. By 2050, the red zone had long since been renamed the green zone. That we had constantly invested millions of dollars every year relentlessly to support the natural regeneration, the corridor from the city to the sea. We'd been successful in reclaiming for nature much of Banks Peninsula. We'd designed participation in choices that enable people to understand there were trade-offs, there are compromises. You can't have everything today. But the city of 2050 is a city that is thriving, climate resilient, and very low emissions. So what did we need to do between now and then? First, we need to believe it is possible, that we are not just some flotsam and jetsam tossed around on the tides of international affairs, blaming others for the circumstances we find ourselves in. We need to accept that people need jobs and incomes if they are to be able to participate in society. But if the only jobs are a result of strip mining natural capital, they're not sustainable. They won't last forever. We'll run out of all that natural capital. It won't be replenished. But if we can protect our natural capital, augment it rather than degrade it, it becomes part of the asset-rich society that attracts talented people. We figured out that you could make things in Christchurch with a human in the loop, that AI doesn't replace humans' unique characteristics, that we need to power our economy with a massive expansion of energy generation for our use, not for export other than embodied in high-value goods and services. We figured out that we could have low-emissions tourism and banned cruise ships that polluted our waters and natural environments because we didn't need them. We figured out how to create sustainable aviation fuels because as we're at the end of the line for long-haul aviation, we have a captive market for refueling. We figured out that short-haul battery electric flight would compete with ground transport, opening up the Canterbury Plains for distributed communities, which relieved the pressure and congestion on the Christchurch city limits. But still, we were such an attractive region and such an attractive city that there was a queue at the door. If there was a queue at the door, it matters how we choose. It matters that we do have a vision of an inclusive, diverse, thriving community. I'm pretty convinced we could do that. We, us, not them and the others. All those are choices that we could make about getting off fossil fuels, about being prepared to build out our renewable energy infrastructure ahead of demand, to reduce the economic rents extracted by incumbent providers. If we could target producing affordable electricity at 8 cents a kilowatt hour, available for everyone, everywhere, for business and for households, and then figure out how to use it efficiently rather than squander it, we have more energy resources in this region than we could possibly use this century. But it's not going to happen if you wait for someone else. It won't happen if you wait for Wellington. It won't happen if you hope that something will turn up just in time. It matters what we do, and what we do is based on what we believe is possible. This city in 2050 could be one of the most compelling propositions in the Southern Hemisphere. Or it could be a basket case of streets congested with privately owned and operated high-emitting vehicles because they were cheap, of data centres that extract value from our energy but leave nothing behind, of a wasteland of abandoned suburban shopping malls as everything went online delivered from somewhere else, as we struggled to have affordable energy as international supply chains of fossil fuels collapsed around us. It doesn't have to be like that. So, my contribution to today's discussion is to say a healthier, wealthier, more prosperous Christchurch is ours to claim. Fundamentally, we do need to get the energy equation right. We have to put ourselves on a war footing to stop the combustion of fossil fuels in the open air in the absence of permanent carbon capture and storage. And we can do that with known technologies starting today. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi kia koutou to all of our speakers. I'll briefly introduce our chair for this evening and invite the panellists to come up and organise themselves on stage, please. Josie Schröder has more than 25 years' experience in shaping places that reflect local identity, support equity, and respect the natural environment. Based in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, she specialises in innovative urban design, regenerative urban strategies, and neighbourhood design with a collaborative approach underpinning her practice. A director at Urban Opera in New Zealand, she's a registered urban designer, qualified planner, and landscape designer. So Josie will lead the conversation for about 25 to 30 minutes or so before we open it up to your questions. Remember, you can ask one by texting it to the number on the screen, 022 565 8693. Please join me in welcoming the panel.
Kia ora koutou. Well, I want to live where Rod will be living in 2050. That is absolutely a vision that I want to be part of, and I'm sure that all of our panellists do as well. It's about where do we start? I think previous conversations have been about the inaction, the desperation, the despair that we've felt through climate inaction. And I think tonight has been a bit of a vision of first the risks that we have to face, but also the opportunities and the choices that we have to make, that we all have to make as a city, as a whānau, as a community, and as individuals. And I think it was very well put by Sarah in terms of some of the aspects that we could do, particularly as individuals. But I'm going to start tonight by first asking Rod a question, because I think he kind of finished with, here we are. But Rod, how do we get there? What is the first step that we can potentially take to this amazing future?
I think the first step is to have the vision of the future and believe in it. That in the absence of that vision, we just muddle along, making do the best we can in the hope that it will turn out okay. That is not a plan, right? So if we can sell ourselves a vision of a low emissions, thriving, climate resilient society that is inclusive, and then we ask ourselves, what are the underpinnings of that? You don't have to stray far before you realise you have to figure this energy thing out. We are going to need the energy to decarbonise transport. We're going to need the energy to manage the built environment. We're going to need the energy to create the jobs of the future. We're going to need the energy to create the food, proteins that the world is going to need. There is no economy or society in the world that has been able to grow its prosperity without increasing its energy consumption. There are a number of societies, more than 20, that have proven over the last decade they can grow prosperity while reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but they all consume more energy.
Well, and in terms of, while we talk about a planet and the energy that the planet forms as a city, those opportunities around energy and the provision of energy and that vision around it, do you see that we could have a city vision that focuses on energy as a first step?
Absolutely. And we have many of the elements in the Canterbury region and in the city's portfolio to make choices that matter. The solar farm, the Kowhai solar farm out at the airport. Orion is competent at the delivery and distribution. But all of these things are going to require capital, technical skills, public support, and a vision about how do we make this affordable.
And I think affordability has kind of come through as a key aspect of conversations here tonight around how we actually pay for our future, or who funds it, or how we actually support that. And I'll just pass over now to James, because in terms of the New Zealand Insurance Council, I think he's had quite some conversations around who starts to fund our future, and whether it is all around the individual or government or councils, and how we might actually follow through with that.
Thank you very much. And I feel like I'm giving Tom a massive job, the gentleman sitting next to me, because ultimately it's been proven that when natural hazard risk is reduced for communities at community level, with some of the projects which are listed in the Ōtautahi climate resilience strategy, you are saving money in the long term. Ultimately, people enjoy lower risk to their lives, but also that lower risk translates that the risk that they're exposed to is when an insurer writes a policy, that risk consideration reflects the increased resilience and natural hazard mitigation that has been built. That then gives people more confidence to then work towards the investments I think Rod's just been talking about. But we know from the Resilient Rivers Communities, which is a collection of regional councils up and down New Zealand, they've studied it in depth. For example, a flood mitigation has a cost-benefit ratio of between 5 and 8, which to my tiny economics mind says that's you're making money at that point. And I think that's where we encourage actively through local government, through central government, through anybody who'll listen, that if you bring forward that capital investment to reduce risk, your medium to long-term outlook is far more positive.
Thanks, James. Does that risk also relate to, if we come back to Rod's idea of energy, and if we're reducing the risks more generally to our communities by actually creating a more sustainable future, and being able to ensure that we have both the substance and the ability to provide for new development in new places, using our opportunities of increased population and so on. Is that something that the industry would see as also being a positive step in terms of that vision?
Oh, absolutely. And I've brought a copy of the Ōtautahi climate resilience strategy, and it's a brilliant piece of work. It's excellent. It systematically sets out the actions that will build confidence of insurers, that build confidence in the risk mitigation and resilience of the community. The challenge is, and this is a challenge everywhere, is putting what is a brilliant strategy into practice.
Yes, and I think that's probably quite often what we have is about what are the barriers that we see to being able to overcome that in terms of putting into practice the type of vision that we actually want to achieve. I think, Tom, that you talked about the council has got quite a number of matters that they are trying to follow through in terms of climate adaptation, some of the things that the community could be doing as well in terms of that climate adaptation and mitigating some of those risks. Have you seen in the work that you've done barriers to actually achieving a more positive future for Ōtautahi Christchurch?
Well, I certainly spend a lot of my day job dealing with delivery of infrastructure. And it has its challenges, but they're all surmountable. We have to manage the impacts of that infrastructure. We need to understand the environmental risks and the benefits, and we need to present those to the community in a way that is we can get the buy-in from those people who need to not only fund it, but those who are directly impacted by it. So the important thing to my mind is taking people along the journey. And some of these infrastructure approaches do certainly take some time to go from idea through to completion. And sometimes along that journey can be quite long. And so we might lose some of our support potentially as these projects move from ideas through into completion and handover. And it is important to take our stakeholders and partners along with us. And we have sort of set a vision with some great examples. Like recently, Council completed works on Te Kuru up in the Upper Heathcote catchment, which is, to my mind, the next Hagley Park for the city. And that idea of combining and delivering a range of values to benefit the community with infrastructure delivery is a great opportunity to take that mindset elsewhere in the city. And the council's certainly looking to achieve that.
So, James, can I throw you a question? Who should pay for protection? Taxpayers, ratepayers, or property owners?
The Ministry for the Environment hired a group of experts to consider this.
No, who do you think should pay?
Who do I think is a representative for the insurance sector? I think it was on one of my slides that I scraped over quickly because it was a quick fire session. But we all have to be on this journey together, and I feel like you're going to accuse me of a cop-out answer here, but it can't just be insurers, it can't just be banks, it can't just be local authorities, it can't just be central government, it can't just be individuals. This is where the criticality of the adaptation framework that's being worked on the government, that we're still hoping for legislation by the end of the year, should guide us in how we work collectively on exactly that question of who pays.
So if I just come back to that for just a minute, you've talked about essentially the payback rate for investing in infrastructure. Largely, it appears that quite often it'll be the local council who are actually funding that up front. But in terms of things like the development scenarios, and I know Te Kuru, you were talking about large-scale stormwater basin mitigates also some of the urban infrastructure in terms of new housing development and the stormwater runoff and that sort of thing, as well as protecting and encouraging our wildlife. And so there's multiple benefits that run across all of these. Should it just be councils who generally appear to be the ones who are funding this, or is there another way to actually achieve this by a more collective approach? I'm just throwing the question to anyone who may wish to answer that.
Well, I think in the past, Council's taken a strong lead, obviously, in that space in terms of developing infrastructure ahead of growth and using development contributions to recover some of those costs. But there are other modes of delivery that are open to Council. One vision that was set forward was in the Ōtautahi Avon River Regeneration Plan that saw delivery of the infrastructure in partnership with other users of that land. So there is an opportunity in that example for different parties to come to the fore and help deliver that large-scale program to the benefit of the community more broadly. But I do see that Council would have to take an active lead in that space.
Any others of the panel have a different or alternative view? no. Perhaps we'll move on from that. I think from my experience in working on some of these projects, including infrastructure projects, developments of new neighbourhoods and so on, there's been quite a need for community involvement, particularly as you move through different stages of development. I think that, Sarah, you've touched on the whole need to connect to, if we are going to see a better future and create that sort of hope and joy in our environments, the need to connect. Do you have ways in which you have worked that have encouraged people to connect more through their involvement in development in the environment?
Thank you. I guess in terms of examples of the pieces of work that I've been involved in have been around connecting up with existing community groups, and sort of really I'm always about joining the dots, pulling people in or organisations into spaces that can support a project. And it's really straightforward stuff around looking after the green or blue spaces in your neighbourhood. So I have like a waterway group working in the eastern suburbs, because that started from a conversation about wanting to take care of the tuna eels in the waterway. The pie in the sky would be naturalising that waterway, which is a concrete drain. So, and naturalising it isn't on the cards with the council. But what we have been able to do is, host a local event celebrating the waterway, which has attracted more and more interest in the group, and joining locals in who were looking at wanting to learn more about eels, wanting to make the area more attractive to use for play and as a commuting corridor that's not for cars, it's for bikes and walking, etc. And also for planting and putting in native species of plant where we can.
Can I just provide some insurance support for those comments from an interesting angle?
Of course.
Because one of the things that insurers talk about a lot, and insurance being the business of assessing the likelihood of damage and the cost of that damage, where you see bits of New Zealand where communities are taking really active decisions to, and the quote is, make space for water and make space for nature. They're looking at some of the climate change modelling that we've talked about, where water's going to need more space, and you're using some of those really positive at community level actions to improve people's well-being. You're also moving property that needs to be insured out of harm's way. So you've both got that, I guess you get a really positive economic as well as cultural, social, and all the really positive things that Sarah just talked about. Those two things can happen at the same time, and I guess that's something our members have encouraged.
And so this comes back to a bit of the discussion about vision. So you have a vision, whether it's a vision that starts at a small scale, at a community scale, where somebody's got an idea and increases that. And so in terms of what we're trying to sort of establish in our beautiful city of 2050, all of the advantages that we might have, our collective vision is becoming, from my undertaking of this conversation, the collective vision becomes an extremely important element of our whole process to that 2050. So what I probably have to say is we've got a room full of people here who probably have a very similar vision in terms of improving the quality of our environment, in terms of trying to lessen some of these effects of climate change. Why is it that we're not actually being able to achieve this vision collectively at the moment? Does anyone have a take on what some of these, we're back to kind of, what are some of the barriers that we need to overcome in order to be able to actually plan and work together a little bit more coherently?
I feel like there's things like cost of living are the first types of things that you hear about when you're out in the community or talking with various groups around, what are the priorities? And, that's top of mind. Actually, I feel like addressing inequality it goes a long way towards the future that we're talking about as a starting point, actually. It feels like there's some work still to be done, really, around reconnecting people, to other humans in place, to reprioritise what's important to us. We're all very, distracted with our online what's happening, and that's we're just a bit disconnected on multiple fronts. And so there's those opportunities to reconnect and have a voice, and we need to connect to amplify our voices, to say, well, these are the things that we do want, what we really care about and what's really important. And, maybe that might not sound like it's climate change, but it's all interconnected. As I say, cost of living is, at the end of the day, any community development work or anything that addresses inequity will ultimately also address climate change and the type of future that we're wanting to work towards.
So I think we've spent 30 years convincing ourselves that if we focus on the near term, we act in our own self-interests, and we take risks, everybody will be better off. After 30 years of experiment, it's pretty damn clear that is not true. That all of us acting alone to make each of ourselves better off doesn't actually make everybody better off. And sometimes it doesn't even make us better off. So I think part of this is an honest conversation about security versus efficiency, about sustainability versus short-term payoffs. There is a cost of living crisis, and it is real. And some of it, quite frankly, is climate change turning up in your rates bill, your insurance bill, your food bill. But also there are some choices we're making. I mean, we're getting to the point where we can't afford the power to heat our own homes, but we're attracting data centres. We can't afford the milk and meat protein we produce that we can sell the world. And if you can't feed, house, clothe, and educate your own population, you have to ask the question, what's the point of it all? And if the answer is, well, we just haven't sweated hard enough, you just need to try and be more efficient, I think we're getting the wrong message.
So that leads to a bigger question, I think, of do we need a political and economic shift of some significance?
I wouldn't wait for Wellington. This is our neighbourhood. We make these choices. There are a lot of these choices that we can make as a community, what we value, how we prioritise our neighbours, how we look after the natural environment. Those are all things that are on us. You can do that today to the extent you can. Whether you put solar on your own roof, that's up to you. Whether you encourage your school to do its own, helping kids understand the natural environment, and those are all things that matter, and they shape the kind of society that we want to live in. And it is too easy to say, oh, it's all about Beijing and Mumbai and Washington, and it's terrible, and we can't do anything about it. We jolly well can.
We can make those changes, and also we can, join our voices together to say this is what we want from our decision makers.
And look, it goes to the simple thing. Next time you see a cyclist, instead of thinking them as a nuisance or being quick and cheap and all the rest of it, think of them as somebody not in a car. Right? Get out of their way, right? And I think that's the whole challenge about this, is we're so focused on getting from A to B and in our own little privately owned, operated motor vehicle. The cost to the city of privately owned and operated motor vehicles, entitlement to curbside parking and free driveways and God knows what else. I mean, at the end of the day, shared mobility will materially reduce the environmental footprint and increase the convenience of getting around our city. but you need to plan for it.
And we do need to plan for it. I think there was a session on transport and walking that Christchurch Conversations held, which was really, what do we need? Why aren't we walking? How can we better make some of those choices on an individual level as well as on a city level of where we choose to put our money, what's actually worthwhile to our community. And I think our panellists are sort of making it quite clear that we have a whole lot of individual choices that we could be making on a daily basis or a monthly basis with the view to the future, while keeping in mind that vision.
Imagine if near every school it took as long to drive the last kilometre as it did to walk. Drop the kids off, they can walk the last kilometre, if it's safe. And get it into people's heads that they don't have to drive door to door everywhere all the time.
I'll just add that the streetscape forms a pretty integral part of the current urban environment, and it also presents a wonderful opportunity for the city to, if we can use that space for and achieve multiple values out of it, then there's a massive amount of land there that could be a fantastic opportunity for individuals and the community and the environment. We do need to, as
make
you say,
choices.
Make choices and set a vision.
And I do think we have quite a lot of opportunity for those choices. I'm not sure whether everyone's aware of the South of Morehouse idea, which is, or SOMO as it might be known, which is the opportunity for a new urban view of south of our city, which takes into some of this regenerative practice, but it needs more support, and we need to probably highlight those opportunities, but more around the vision that we have for our city. It comes back to, how do we ensure that we have this kind of collective vision so we can work on it as an individual and then come together. Are there some sort of key ways that you believe that we could collectively come together to start having a stronger voice, apart from sessions like today, which is absolutely fantastic? I mean, we're all here because we want a different vision for our city, or a better vision for our city. Sorry, John.
Well, I'm always a strong advocate for the democratic process, talking to your elected members, asking them to understand what's important to you, and helping the council and getting involved in those processes are a fantastic and a very important way for setting the vision as a community. Council staff can't do it alone. We need the help of our communities to understand and drive for that better future.
On that note, we're getting lots and lots of questions in, but quite a few relate to the voting public. Many along the lines of the voting public seems to be averse to more spending, sort of owe my rates or owe my taxes, even if it's investing millions to save billions. So what can we do? What sort of framings or messaging might be most effective so people across the political spectrum get behind this sort of preparation that we need to do?
I always thought leaders were supposed to lead, not follow. I thought the idea of leaders was they painted the vision, they rallied the people, and the people chose them. We seem to have degenerated into ask people what they want. And of course, when you say that to people, they say, I want more for less, I want everything for nothing. It's not a helpful answer. So I think, expecting our leaders to have those honest conversations that says, there are payoffs here, that if we spend millions, we save billions. There are investments we can make that will lower and make more affordable energy costs for business and households. But if you just constantly shape it as, I want more for less and everything for nothing, then that rhetoric will get you exactly nothing for nothing.
I'd love to jump in on that one. Sorry, and refer people back to my slides if you just can, when we looked at the cost of severe weather events and we saw the gradient of that statistic. And my wife's a treasury analyst, and Rod said, let's not wait for Wellington, so I'm just trying to work out how to navigate this one. But right now, the cost of severe weather events on communities, on cities, is not modelled into Treasury's forecasts. So sorry for getting too Wellington about it. Treasury attempts to model how much government and life in New Zealand is going to cost. The impact of severe weather events is what they call an unquantified fiscal risk, which and as long as that's left as this kind of ambiguous thing, the case for the millions of investment now to protect the billions in the future is unable to be made. And so the advocacy point there is we need to be completely honest with ourselves about what severe weather is costing us and has costed us recently, which is why in our standard slide pack you see the graphs. And then this is the point, I guess, about democratic citizens being armed with information to then go and talk to candidates, is to say, we know severe weather is costing us more year on year because of climate change. That creates higher natural hazard risks that then flows through to the way insurers are pricing those risks. We want people to have that risk literacy to say, we need to be honest with ourselves about the cost and we need to do something about it.
Thanks, James. So does this mean we need to make some hard choices as well, some hard personal choices, actually, in terms of looking at the value more collectively as a community, instead of saying, well, I want to live in this neighbourhood and therefore you should protect me to help me stay here, rather than saying, well, perhaps I need to rethink about where I'm living or the choices I'm making about the house that I buy in the area that I buy and what that actually will impact in terms of the longer term.
And I think I strongly endorse the document, the Ōtautahi Climate Resilience Strategy, because in it, one of the core actions is raising the availability and accessibility of that core data so people can then make those much more informed decisions, and then should a resilience action be needed, they can then be as informed as possible when they go and talk to their local authority, go and talk to their local MPs about the resilience that they need. So, I mean, Ōtautahi's already identified that as an action. So I guess very warmly and well supported by the insurance sector as well.
Yes, I find it quite, as an urban designer, I've found it quite difficult to moderate the sort of the decisions around things like density and increasing housing density and some of the risks that we have around flood mitigation or water inundation and so on. So we've got these kind of things that we have to weigh up a bit more, I think, in terms of the values. Sorry, Emma, do you have another one for us?
We do. We've got quite a few coming in around the theme of the scale and speed of change or planning required. So one person's asked, sometimes I wonder if doing first and asking for forgiveness after is the only way to make some changes on the scale required possible. What, in your mind, is a good approach to pass things along quickly and therefore give us the best chance for a good outcome in 2050?
There's a concept called least regret, right? It says, in an uncertain and unknowable future world, what are the choices you make that you have the lowest likelihood to regret? So if you built too much energy production and distribution, what would you likely regret? If you put in more cycleways to make it even more convenient to get around by walking, e-bikes and so forth, what's the regret function here? And so I think the way to think about some of these is, if you do them and it turns out you did too much too soon, what do you feel about that? If you don't do them and you discover that you've done too little, it's too late, what do you feel about that? And so that's back to the insurance issue about, well, you know, there are risks here, they're going to fall, we don't know where they're going to fall. Some of them will turn out to be a lot worse than we are currently thinking. Some of them we can mitigate, but I think the conversation about, well, I don't want to do anything because it looks cheaper to do nothing than to do something is the fallacy that we are living with today.
I feel like there's something in there as well around equity in terms of like what is going to actually do the best for everyone, and not leave people behind needs to be a part of the consideration in these thinking processes. And also, I think I've been sort of mulling slightly on the like not building in dumb places kind of rhetoric, and thinking about the people who maybe are living in these places that are at high risks, are potentially don't have any choices around that, you know, and it's might be more about where you can rent, that sort of consideration that needs to be factored in as well about, how landlords, what are the levers for motivating where landlords have properties, etc., and where we have affordable housing.
That's exactly right. And this is something, I guess, our urging for an adaptation framework that every party buys into and to bring an equity lens to exactly these conversations, because the alternative, and maybe this is part of that kind of bleak future that Rod talked about, is if you rely on a pure market signal in terms of the cost of risk, that is exactly what happens. Equity is not factored in, the market is unsentimental, and people with the least ability to respond to the harms that they're exposed to suffer those harms. And that's again why I'm being repetitive, banks, insurers, local government, central government, communities need to come together with an enduring adaptation framework to smooth that, to avoid what was just described.
So I think it's a really interesting one, and be very careful, somebody should fact check this. But often Dunedin South is sort of held up as a poster child of anticipation and engagement with the community for the purposes of adaptation and so forth, because poor old Dunedin South is getting a bit of a hammering. I saw a data point some weeks ago that suggested half of the houses in Dunedin South are now owned by people who have bought them since 2015. Now, they are fixed with knowledge about the circumstances. And I think we have to begin to think, when did people know, or when could people have known, or when should people have known the risk that they were taking on? Because is it reasonable for taxpayers, ratepayers, insurers and banks to underwrite those who chose to take that risk? Now, I do hear what saying is sometimes in low-lying lands it's the cheap land and the cheap houses that make them affordable. But it's Clayton's affordability if you're going to get flooded out within 7 years and lose your home and your equity.
I'd also add to that fact that people devalue the impact of flooding ahead of it occurring. I've spoken to a lot of people who have lived through flooding in their houses, and sometimes repetitively, and it is traumatic. It's scarring for people, but if you speak to those who haven't experienced it, the imagination leads people to think that it's quite easy to get over. It's not such a big problem that will be
The water
okay.
retreats.
The water retreats and the problem goes away. But I would just, from my lived experience and speaking to many of those people who have flooded, it is a more deeply traumatising effect than you might imagine.
So New Zealand's built 15,000 houses on floodplains since 2015. Because we think somehow we can build bigger pumps and better drains.
Hey, I'm an engineer. We can. It's just about funding, Rod.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the Dutch did such a great job. Even the Dutch are beginning to retreat. And they are the smartest people in figuring this stuff out. And if they're going, maybe we should learn.
Let alone they've been investing for centuries and have invested significantly a portion of the GDP in those, towards those efforts. Yes.
We probably have time just for one last question from the audience. Somebody would like to know how well we are doing in terms of planning for major supply chain disruptions and for some of the climate change forecasted events ahead. In the panelists' opinion, how are we doing as a city?
That's a pretty tough one, actually. Supply change.
Part of my response to that is we went through a supply chain shock with COVID. And many of the projects that I was working on at that time had to stop, and since then we've seen significant changes in construction cost in terms of inflation. So we have we built in some of that challenge within our future forecasts in terms of funding profiles and project costs. So it's kind of just the reality of present day infrastructure delivery that you need to understand what you're buying and how you're buying it, but also understanding there will be uncertainty moving forward with time in terms of ability to deliver. And as I mentioned earlier, taking the community along on the journey and having people trying to explain things might take longer than we had hoped or might even cost more, unfortunately.
And that's where like relocalising comes into play big time as well. I think that my understanding of our food security is that it's, what's the word for it? Fragile. So that's what where again we need to connect and rebuild our communities, and localise things like Kai for these events.
So I think the supply chain disruption depends entirely on how it comes about. Alpine Fault 8 Plus, look, this is going to be extremely challenging, particularly for cities further south than Christchurch, it turns out. That looks very different than a collapse of the fossil fuel supply chains because of global uncertainty or geopolitics or trade bans or shipping failures. I mean, the Minister of Energy recently required the petrol companies to hold 30 days of supply in New Zealand. That's very reassuring. That'll work well. It's great, and you go, and all the technology to get 70% of the light vehicle fleet off petrol exists today. So, it's nice to have 30 days supply. Oh, and by the way, the gas guys who we trusted to manage gas supplies, what a bunch of losers, right? I mean, really? We were 10 years away from running out of gas for the last 30 years, and suddenly we're 7 years away? Did they not know? Did they not measure properly? Or did it just kind of evaporate? So supply chain interruption can come locally or globally. It can, and I think your point is fair. We should think about resilience, not just efficiency. Security, not just cheapness.
And perhaps there's a measure of, as you talked about earlier, a bit more about equity and actually sharing the resources that we do have available rather than them going to one particular group or another within our society. So we only have a few minutes left in terms of the panel discussion, and it's taken us to a variety of different places, some a little bit unexpected as well. I think that really what this is tonight seems to be a call to action, a call to positive action, and really not about feeling that we don't have the opportunity to influence what happens to us, that we need vision, and some of this is big vision for our city in terms of energy, in terms of our infrastructure and how we build it, in terms of ensuring that we have community equity, in terms of connectedness and being supported by industry as well, who can help advocate, as I would understand it. I think I've got one question that I'm allowed to ask. I might ask it both of the panel, but I also want to ask it of all of you tonight as well. So we have the opportunity to influence in our words and in our actions. And each of the panellists has provided you with different ways that we can think about this and things that we want to do and what we can take, how we can take action, whether it's localised or whether it's as a community. My question is really, within the context of our city, of Ōtautahi Christchurch, what actions are you going to take today, tomorrow, or next year to ensure that there is a positive response to climate change? Are they going to be small steps? Are they going to be big moves? together, can we make that difference? So I'm going to ask a sort of personal question to each of the panellists and put them on the spot and say, what is it that you're going to do in the next day, month, or year to make a positive personal response to climate change?
I've got two answers, which we've got a quote for rooftop solar today from our supplier. So we've worked that out in 9 years and it starts paying for itself. The return period on a stop bank investment is far sooner than that. I'm just going to labour that point. But no, in terms of what I'm going to take away from Ōtautahi Christchurch Climate Resilience Strategy, which I think I've mentioned for the 10th time now, is I'm actually going to take that around as a case study of a really solid plan for responding to these hazards in a way that will keep insurance accessible, available out into the future. I think it's a great piece of work, and I think it should be. The difficulty, of course, you generally get these great pieces of work out of some of the larger, more well-resourced local authorities, and I think it's a case study which could really be replicated, obviously with local input nationwide. I think it's brilliant.
I really liked hearing Sarah saying her point about connection and acting together amplifies impacts. So I took that on board a bit. I think I'm going to get a bit more involved in the Community Waterways Partnership. So that's an initiative run locally out of the City Council, bring a whole lot of different community waterways groups together. I might see if I can get a bit more involved in that.
Kia ora. Thank you, that's cool. Gosh, I mean, every day and every way I kind of try a little bit harder to, do what I preach. And I think taking part today is like reminding me to get better at communicating, the things that I am doing and, or the things that I know as well around this. But, and also I'm just always struggling to be doing more active transport for myself. So now that spring is here, it will definitely be an opportunity to start getting back onto my bicycle for work commutes and trying to embed that habit again, or re-embed it, yes.
Kia ora.
Yeah. So we have two things going on. We have, for the last couple of years, we had a small family company that provides solar as a service to schools and not-for-profits, NGOs and SMEs. So we did Ōtautahi, the unlimited school down here. We did Rangiora High. Last week we turned on a 120 kilowatt array for Whakatane District Council's rec centre. And these are no capital up front, no monthly obligation solar as a service offerings for these organisations. So we'll continue to grow that. And we've set up, the family have set up with two independent trustees, a charitable trust recognised by the Charities Commission to take ownership of 14 hectares of rewilding, native bush adjoining the Te Aroha State Forest Park in the Wainawa Valley. So we'll protect that in perpetuity, and it's 45 years into regenerating, so it's already well on the way.
I'll just add in a very quick one from me, which is no means can be on the back of Rod's there, which is I'll plant 11 kahikatea tomorrow beside the Ōpawahu Heathcote River. Help build us a little forest. But really, I want to say many, many thanks for your kororo tonight. It's been very enlightening. I have learnt a lot. There's a lot more for me to explore, and I hope for the same of our audience. So thank you very much for your contributions. I believe that they've been a positive action towards climate action. Thank you.
I'll let you speakers take a nice comfy chair, although maybe they're more comfy. Stay where you are. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui e ngā rangatira. E rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ciaran Fox, tōko ingoa. My name is Ciaran. I'm a poet and public health specialist, and I work for the National Public Health Service. I want to shout out to my brilliant colleague, Sarah Macfarlane, there, being on the panel. I can absolutely 100% confirm that that woman walks the talk every day. She was very shy about saying what she's going to do next, but she literally drives this mahi at National Public Health Service for us locally, and you make it fun as well. And thank you for reminding us that fundamentally, this is all a wellbeing question. Wellbeing of the planet and us and our economy is all interconnected. And I couldn't help but think, as Rod talked about vision and who sets vision and where does that come from, how powerful that is in terms of its leverage, that there's a role for our creative sectors in this. This is where we turn to our artists and poets, and that's my long-winded way of getting to the point of why I'm up here tonight, which is it's my great privilege and honour to curate and introduce the poets as part of Christchurch Conversations. And I think that our poet tonight that I'm about to introduce once said, and I'm often quoting him on this, that a poet's role, amongst many roles probably, is to give voice to the voiceless. And I think about that all the time. And I'm not sure he's going to do that tonight, but it's part of what he was thinking about, and especially when it comes to speaking up for those that can't, and particularly, human and non-human lives and interests, and that's part of this equation too. So, maybe the poets can have a part to play in helping set some vision for the future. So our poet tonight, Erik Kennedy, is the author of the poetry collections Sick Power Trip 2025, just hot off the press. And in fact, I don't know if you've got a copy of it here, but not only by nature of the number of syllables in that title, but also by the electric cover, you can sing along to it to the tune of Pink Pony Club. And I do all the time when I think about that book. So sorry about that. Also published Another Beautiful Day Indoors in 2022, and There's No Place Like the Internet in Springtime in 2018. He co-edited, and this is maybe his major qualification being here tonight, the No Other Place to Stand, which was an anthology of climate change poetry from Aotearoa and the Pacific in 2022. It's an incredible book, and I urge you all to go out and seek that out. He's the poetry editor of our local journal Tākahi and an adjunct fellow in English at the University of Canterbury. Please give a warm and kind welcome to Erik Kennedy as he attempts to mount the stage with crutches. Kia ora. Oh, I'm so glad you made it.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Erik Kennedy, aho. I realized as soon as Tom Parsons started speaking that my poem is essentially like an emotion-focused version of his presentation, really. It's kind of like, it's a flooding poem. It's set in the present, but it's looking towards the future, and it's sort of about psychic preparedness. And I'm sorry that it's not more hopeful, because this is the last thing you're sort of going to hear. And everyone was sort of so lovely and positive and thinking like, we can do this. And this is a poem that maybe is less, we can do this, and maybe more like, what if we don't? And it's sort of, my travels take me to Ainsley Terrace quite a lot on the Opawaho Heathcote River, and that floods if you look at it the wrong way. Never mind, like, if there's really foul weather. So, the poem's called Shin Deep in the Flood Waters, Already Afraid. If it was flowing, 6 inches of this water could knock me off my feet. Floodwater moving at 4 miles per hour would hit me with the same force per unit area as a pillowcase full of doorknobs dropped from a 6-story building. For now, I'm just in my wellies, gulping at river spillover out of curiosity, like a traveler here in this leafy suburb, to see a night flower that blooms once a year. I don't need to be here. I can leave whenever I want. I'm about to leave, actually, because I've set boundaries for myself. Like, I'm not really cool with drowning. My safe word is, oh my God, the water. But I had to know firsthand what a little bit of disaster looks like near home. A tasting menu amount of emergency for the finicky and faint-hearted like me who live an uncomforting couple of feet higher up. It's important to be exposed to the new culture. So I've got something to talk about in the long afternoons, in the busy, busy rain. Thank you.
A huge thank you to all our speakers, panellists, chair and poet. You've got us thinking about how we best prepare for times ahead. And on that note, our friends at the Word Festival have a writing competition open at the moment that invites entrants to contribute up to 150 words of microfiction, poetry, or creative non-fiction, exploring a theme of a day in the life, 100 years in the future, in 2025 Ōtautahi, Christchurch. There are prizes up for grabs. Just head to their website and look out for the Blue Sky Dreaming competition. Thanks again to those who have made tonight's event possible. He Whakawhiti Kōrero Christchurch Conversations is funded through Christchurch City Council's Sustainability Fund. And we are thrilled to announce our next and final Christchurch Conversation for 2025, Urban Climate Adaptation, which takes place at the Piano on Wednesday, 15th of October, 6:30 to 8 p.m, and features international speakers from the upcoming UN Adaptation Futures Conference, alongside local experts, with former Mayor Leanne Dalziel chairing the panel discussion. Join us as we consider what climate adaptation is, why it matters, and ask what are the best ways to inhabit this landscape and ensure a livable Ōtautahi for ourselves and future generations. You can book this now. The link is live on our website. And all that is left for me to do is thank you all for coming. See you next time. Pō maria koutou.